Hello, and thanks for tuning in. Growing up in Providence, Rhode Island, I had been called the N-word more than once by a fast-moving vehicle while I walked around the perimeter of my neighborhood. But I didn't expect that to happen playing lacrosse on my home field. When it finally did, and I could not sense any of my teammates coming to my defense in that moment, it made real again the fact that I was the solitary Black student in the upper school of Providence Country Day, a prep school in East Providence, Rhode Island. That moment also shapes how I think about student persistence and retention. For example, when a student feels like they are at a school and not in a school, they may rely on independent resilience to survive. But does it have to be that way? As destiny would have it, my path recently crossed again with my lacrosse coach from back then. He witnessed the event and took me out shortly thereafter. But somehow, more than 30 years later, we have wound up working on a history committee together for our school's 100th anniversary. I've always wondered what he thought about what happened and whether he knew what kind of impact it had on me. To his credit, he agreed to let me ask. My hope was that our conversation could spark insight for others supporting students of color facing cultural isolation. So go ahead and grab a cup of a hot beverage and join us. All right, so I'm talking with my lacrosse coach from high school. I never thought we would have this moment to be able to chat like this, but I'm grateful to introduce you to Rod Eaton, who we used to call Pop, but is now insisting that we call him Rod as we all continue to progress in age.
True.
Rod, could you, introduce yourself in the way that you would like to, and how you first began working at PCD?
It is interesting. I started PCD in February of 1967. I wish I could say I had a sterling undergraduate career, but there were a few bumps and bruises. So I wound up as a fifth-year senior with 2 courses left in the spring. I knew I wanted to teach the following year in independent schools, so I went into the placement office at Brown and asked what they might have that I could apply for September of the next year. They said, well, here's some information. However, we have this opening for a part-time history teacher
Okay.
in East Providence, Rhode Island. Would you be interested? So I said yes. I went over there. I was interviewed by the headmaster, who was Evan West, also a Brown graduate, and I got the job.
Okay, great. So I wanted to talk to you about a couple of things that happened while I was at PCD. So, right, so on the whole, there was much more good that happened than bad.
Yeah.
But the things that happened that were very challenging often happen either outside of the view of teachers,
Sure.
or the things that I was feeling about what happened outside of the view of teachers. And what's interesting is when I look back and think about who I was back then, when things would happen, I wouldn't necessarily know who I could tell about it. So I could potentially tell my father about it, but he didn't necessarily have not have the experience that I was having.
Okay.
So he stopped going to school in the 3rd grade because he had to take care of his family. So he didn't have a full high school experience.
Sure.
So my mom had a high school experience, but not at an all-male school in Rhode Island, right? So I could tell her things, but she couldn't necessarily relate to it. And on top of that, I was the only African-American in the upper school when I graduated.
Sure. Yeah.
So all throughout that time, there were these things that would occur, and I just had to deal with it. So I did deal with it. Most of it was positive, I guess.
Sure.
But I wanted to get your take on what you could have seen happening when they were happening to me, as a way to get a sense of what it would take for another student to break through, to be able to speak
Sure.
to a teacher about what's happening to them. So one of them was in one of our history books. I was flipping through the pages, and I guess it was the 30s. I believe it was the 30s that we
Sure.
were in that period.
Yeah.
And I saw a picture of a man being lynched.
Yeah.
And, that was really devastating, seeing
Mhm.
that. But I remember at that time not feeling that, I could, that anybody would care, that it bothered me, you
Yeah.
know?
And
Um, yeah.
so going forward, I don't remember that incident. I don't think I taught eighth grade history, and you said it was in the eighth grade.
I think so.
So,
Yeah, I
all right.
think it
Do you
was.
remember who your teacher was?
Uh, I think it was Mr. Tierney. I think he was my
Okay.
teacher.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
it could have been Mr. Tierney, who's still there. Great guy.
Okay.
Um, and I wish there had been some way to get you to talk to some people.
hmm
How much do you know about Dick Philbrick?
I saw him as a scholar,
Yeah.
but not a confidant.
Well, you wouldn't see him as someone who at probably 130 pounds during World War II,
hmm
all right, when he was sent for training in the Deep South,
Mm,
sat in the back of the bus,
mm.
all right?
So interesting.
And Dick Philbrick would have lost more fights than he would have won,
Mm,
but he wasn't putting up with that stuff at all.
interesting.
Um, so here's our conundrum. It's there, and it might have been there for you, but how do we bridge that gap to let you know it's there?
Right, right,
What are some situations that help people do that?
right.
And I don't know.
hmm
And you mentioned another incident that obviously
Yeah,
is team I was coaching,
yeah,
and racial slur by a member of an opposing team.
right.
I'm trying to remember who the coach was. It wasn't Dennis Dobbin then, not in '84.
Oh, you mean of LaSalle Academy?
Yeah. Was it
hmm
your senior year?
It was.
Okay. So I don't think it was Dennis then. I think he was officiating then.
Okay.
Dennis is my best friend in the world. Okay.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
if you did see us probably at some point just screaming at each other. And, what you didn't know is that we met an hour later for beers and said, how did you do that? We're great friends. But he too, if he had heard that, let me tell you, that guy would have been off the field in 2 seconds. I mean,
Mhm.
that's who Dennis is.
Yeah.
So, but again, I don't remember you saying anything to me about it. Maybe
Yeah.
you did.
Yeah, I didn't.
Okay.
So
And to be honest, in the
yeah.
game, I was an absolute lunatic, so I might not have been paying much attention. I'm looking at scores and how we're doing and who does
Right.
what next. I mean, I was pretty heavily involved as a coach, but I wish it would have been great if after that you had come and the next day I'm thinking about that team, those guys.
Yeah.
All right. Let's look at some of those guys, Hayes and Gavitt and Boucher and stuff.
hmm
They would have said, they probably would have gone over and tried to pummel the guy from the South.
hmm
But I think they would have been more interested in helping you through it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not faulting you for not saying anything.
Mhm.
I'm just saying there were systems there and we all missed it.
Mm.
And I wish we had done something differently. But I know I did some substitute teaching in public school here.
hmm
It didn't work out well. It was very challenging. Middle school,
Mm.
very challenging. And there was one girl that came in late to class with a note, and she was being surly and she wasn't paying attention to the lesson, and
Yeah.
and she made a comment that school really didn't make much difference that day because one of her friends said she was no longer in their group. She wasn't
Yeah.
black enough because her mother was white.
Oh.
Duh. Math is not the biggest issue in this young person's life at that
Yeah.
particular moment.
hmm
What can we do? How can we stop that? How can we change things and get people together? And I think that would happen. I think there's potential for that to happen.
Yeah.
But I don't have that answer. At least you're looking for it.
Well, I mean, definitely what's happened since then
Mhm,
is a recognition of what it takes for a school to intervene.
mhm.
So, um, so my sons, who I mentioned, went to Civil Friends School in
Yeah, great.
DC, and they, it's 30 years later. So a lot of people have come to a
Right,
realization
sure.
about what it takes, not just them. But definitely when I think about some of the differences between my experience and their experiences, well,
Yeah,
one, because I had that experience at PCD, I could share with them what happened. And so
yeah.
I could get into their space and say,
Mhm.
uh, do you feel that you're at the school or do you feel like you're in school?
Uh-huh.
Because definitely what I was feeling was that I was at school.
Mhm.
And even though those resources were around that you mentioned, and even though I had leadership positions there, and there
You
were
did.
moments, right,
You
that
ran the
I
place. So, yeah.
that I could make connections with, some of the students. There was this unexplainable sense that I was just being tolerated. And I can't, I just
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not, I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
fully rational, but it's just part of it was not only some of the other things that would happen at PCD, but also in the East Providence area.
Yeah.
So just taking the bus home from East
So
Providence.
where was home for you?
So I lived over in the Elmwood section, which is much more diverse. The Elmwood section of Providence, which was like just south of South Providence.
Did you know any kids named Fox? White kids?
No,
Stephen, Raymond,
no,
Donald? Okay.
mm-mm, mm-mm.
Those are my cousins. There's a
Okay,
million of them. My
okay,
my my father's sister had 14 children.
okay.
So the odds are good, and they lived there.
Right.
And-
At some point in time, our paths would have
yeah,
crossed. Yeah.
yeah. All right.
Yeah. So
So
that,
you had that bus trip too, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So even the bus trip was perilous,
Sure.
going back. So it was this constant sense of like being surrounded by a threat. And
Hmm.
so, for me, I was always wondering, like, am I going to say the wrong thing and then no longer be tolerated? So
Right.
there was always that kind of sense there. So when these things would bubble up, like the incident on the lacrosse field,
Yeah.
um, in that moment, you're wanting to feel that you're going to be that someone is going to stand up for you,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, if that doesn't happen, it multiplies that feeling that you're
Yeah.
right. So, but the goal here, really, in talking about it is to talk about what makes the difference,
Sure.
for other students. And so one thing is, as a parent,
Hmm.
knowing that that could happen, for my sons, as I was saying before, I would ask those questions.
Sure.
How are you feeling about, your presence, on campus? And
But you
so
did
that,
not have that with your parents
correct,
for the
correct,
reasons you explained. I mean,
right,
not any fault of either of them, but your
right,
mom wasn't a guy and your dad didn't have that experience. And so,
right.
yeah, and that's an emptiness.
Hmm.
So,
And
yeah.
plus, for my mom, she was it. It was such a dream for her to see her son go off to a
Sure.
school that had many more resources than the school she went to.
Yeah.
That a part of you doesn't want to let your mother down or
Yeah.
get her to think that she made the wrong decision by putting you there.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's that guilt also. So you kind of keep all of that in also. So but yeah, but so for them, that's one thing. And the other thing was that's made the difference, was to really strike up a rapport with his other teachers, so that there was a chance, so that if something did happen,
Sure.
that communication channel would already be open,
Hmm.
um, and and with the administrators also,
Yeah.
and so something actually did happen in one of the grades for my younger son.
Hmm.
But once that happened, I mean, we had the middle school, head of the middle school, we had her email address. We had many
Sure.
times we've talked to her. So when it came time to talk to her about this incident, we didn't have to get to know her and then talk about the incident.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? And so those lines of communication were already open.
Hmm.
So those are definitely those
Sure.
things definitely helped. Um, when you look back, what is your sense of what the campus was like?
Uh, I think there was a split between jocks and nunjocks.
Mm,
I think that was one line.
okay.
Um, there was, as I remember, somewhat ability sectioning. There were some advanced classes, some other classes that were, especially in math and foreign
Yeah.
language, that would, so there was some, and I did the scheduling then, so I knew that some people could, for the most part, boy, I thought people were doing what they could with what they had.
Sure.
I love the fact that we had every year,
Yeah.
every year you were there,
Mm-hmm.
we had some very good lacrosse teams.
Yeah, we did.
On every team,
Mm-hmm.
we had people that were no better than I was in high school. There was somebody that was there, but we needed that guy. We needed him sometime in the third quarter. We needed him to be there during practice. We needed that person. And I kind of felt everybody was in that together. And I think I got that from my experience at Lawrence Academy.
Mm-hmm.
45 kids in my graduating class at Lawrence Academy.
Mm-hmm.
All boys too at that time. So who needs a 125-pound attackman / goaltender?
Mm-hmm.
They did.
Mm-hmm.
There was nobody else. I mean, was I going to face off and go against the Packard twins, who were two of my best friends, but they were bricks of athletes, wonderful, wonderful guys. No.
Mm-hmm.
Who else needed you? Everybody needed you. The chorus needed you. The play needed you. What else? I forget. Were you in plays and
Yeah.
the chorus?
I
and
did pretty
stuff?
much I did it as much as I could possibly
Just
do.
a second. I'm not leaving. But, so here, yeah, good.
Okay.
All right.
Yep. I see
The
that.
guy in the driver's seat is the only one too young to have a lesson. The skinny one with that's me.
Okay.
Jeff Simmons owns the car. The
Okay.
other two are the Packard twins, co-captains of hockey, co-captains of lacrosse.
Okay.
And we produced a record
Okay.
in 1962. We were in the chorus. We did this. But I just remember the excitement about doing stuff.
Yeah.
The excitement about showing up and saying, we need a kind of lanky guy who can carry a long stick.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
That would be you.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
didn't mind getting his nose dirty and could fly.
Right.
We thought those were good things. And we would put that in, as part of the package.
Yeah.
But there you were in the play, they were in everything else. And that's part of the reason I want to do the oral history thing.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of that was there. Jack Hayes tells a story. I spoke to him this week. He's got a new job as vice president at Nichols College for athletics. But he
Okay.
talked to me about how he and Bill Green were on a middle school basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you were on that team. I don't know. No,
Maybe.
you may have been a year ahead. But anyway, they were under.
Oh yeah, they divided it. So they're a year behind me. So I remember they had an 8th grade team and they had a 9th grade team.
Okay, yes.
So I was on the freshman.
You were in the freshman team. Well,
Yeah.
their team was awesome. It was
Mm-hmm.
Gavitt, Ina Chile,
I remember that.
Rick Sullivan. They were dynamite athletes.
Yeah.
They had won every game going into the last game against Moses Brown. Ina Chile gets a detention. I'm sure he deserved the detention,
Yeah.
but he got a
He
detention.
probably did.
So he has to leave at halftime to do his detention.
Mm-hmm.
And they're ahead by 5 or something like that. They wind up losing the game by 1 point.
Mm-hmm.
And there's Jack Hayes and Billy Green in the locker room in the old Metcalf. Remember that steamy, awful locker room down there in the showers, in the locker room. And they're crying. And in comes Evan West.
Mm-hmm.
There's the headmaster of the school sitting down with 2 guys helping him through this.
Yeah.
So I think there was a lot of that there.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry it wasn't there when you needed it, and with the resources that you needed at that particular time.
Mm.
But I think there was a lot of it there, and I think I did what I could when I was later on. When I was head of upper school and stuff. I tried to do it there, but that was a stupid job than what I had, and they were just asking me to do too much stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what so I have thought about that, the possibility that there was more there than I could realize. But I think again, for me, it's a reminder of why I needed to take the initiative with my sons, and
Yeah,
that they needed, they may have been thinking that, well, we really wanted them to be at that school, and we had a lot riding on it for them.
yeah,
So I can imagine them not wanting to say anything.
sure.
And so, because, in retrospect too, I've thought about some of the other teachers who were there, like Mr. Cashman, or,
Oh, yeah,
like other teachers, Mr. Manchester, who
sure.
gave me opportunities to do things.
Yeah.
And, they were very pleasant
Hmm.
people. So, one thing that's funny though is like the one person who I thought I really could say something to was Mrs. Spadia. So for the audience, Mrs. Spadia was the only one at PCD that I was aware of that had an afro.
You did?
So I thought maybe he could kind
Yeah,
of understand where I was coming from,
yeah,
but what I needed back then was somebody to give me the signal that I could have those kinds of conversations with them,
right.
you know?
You're
And
right.
and again, I'm not really this isn't about trying to fault anybody. It's
No,
about
no, it isn't.
helping other people to think about the fact that those lines may exist for students, and
Right.
someone needs to take the initiative to jump into
Sure.
that space, and bridge that gap. And so,
One of the neat things that Pomfret School had was an advisor system. I think we had something akin to that at PCD, but it was boarding and that was different.
mm-hmm,
So you had 5 to 10 advisees.
mm-hmm.
They came to your house Thursday night for dinner, or you went out together for
Wow,
dinner. Sometimes
interesting.
you eat in the dining hall, especially with a young faculty who lived in the dorm and didn't have good cooking facilities. But for the most part, you had a one-on-one conversation with. I still talk with those guys. Not all of them. I don't want to say
Yeah.
all of them, but I'm still involved with those guys and girls.
Mm-hmm,
Um, to this day. And it was a great, great relationship. It was well structured.
mm-hmm.
When there were faculty meetings,
Yeah.
if you were my advisee and the name Arnold Key came up for some sort of problem academically,
Mm-hmm.
go straight to the advisor. What do you know? What do you think? And sometimes the advisor would say, I don't know what's
Yeah.
happened. But sometimes the
Mm-hmm.
advisor would say, if you know what was going on at home, you know, he's
Right.
got to have a hug.
Right.
That's all we need. Okay. He's going to get through it, but he's got to have a hug.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was good. And structurally, as you look at how you might reform education, something like that works.
Mm-hmm.
It works if you've got pretty dedicated faculty, and I
Right.
think
Right.
PCD and Pomfret both did, but
Yeah.
but it would work that way.
Mm-hmm. So in closing, like, what would you say to parents, like in light of our conversation about, what they could be doing to help their children, get through a school where, they could be the only one, or they could be facing some kind of, the fear of rejection, or,
Mhm.
they're one of the, like one of the few, in in the school the way I was. Like, what would you say to them?
I would say, talk to them, engage them as much as you can. I mean, I have obviously had 2 daughters and have grandkids, and how was school today? I asked Desmond, one of my grandson, when I pick him up. Yeah, it was good, bad. That's it. I'm not getting detailed.
Right.
But try to maybe set aside a time you can say, hey, what's the worst thing that happened this week? What's the best thing that happened this week?
Mhm,
What's really cool? What are some things you're struggling with? What's the
mhm.
hardest thing you had to do this week?
Yeah.
What resources do you have that would make things a little better?
Mhm,
Who have you helped this week?
mm,
How have you been part of the solution this week?
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and I think those kinds of conversations can help out. And
mhm,
I do think that organizing a school in a way that there is some small group
mhm,
conversations where you can go in there. Interesting, when the kids are around the dinner table, the best times were when they were eating and finishing eating, and Florence and I would be doing the dishes.
mhm.
Keep your ears open then, baby. It's kind of like when you're
Right,
driving the van.
Right. I got
Okay,
you. Right.
back from a game. That's when you're going to know how the world works. There,
Yeah,
and create those situations as best you can.
right. Okay. Thank you so much. This is great. I really appreciate you letting me
All
walk
right.
through that with you. It's been more than 30 years, and that those incidents, were sitting in the back of my head. And
Well,
again, I've gotten through them, but you
we
know,
share a few things.
yeah.
You need to remember that I went to Lawrence Academy on an absolute full scholarship.
Hmm.
We had some very wealthy people at Lawrence
Yeah.
Academy,
Hmm.
really wealthy.
Hmm.
The Packard twins had two houses, one on Lake Winnipesaukee and another in Newport News, California. Okay, they had an East Coast Bentley and a West Coast Bentley. They were down to earth folks. You didn't get dinner when you stayed over there. You didn't get dinner until you chopped some wood. I mean, they were great, normal people, but
Right.
I'm suddenly in an economic area that I don't know anything about,
Right.
and I do not have a. You had to wear jacket and tie.
Hmm. Hmm.
I did not have a new one
Right.
when I went there. I had stuff that I gotten at the used clothing shop in Hollis, New Hampshire. So plus, I'm 112 pounds when I showed,
Right.
and with the same big mouth I got now, so it wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
Uh, but you're right, and I had tough times. I
Hmm.
almost left Lawrence Academy full scholarship at the end of my sophomore year. Just
Hmm.
things. I had made a varsity team as a sophomore.
Hmm.
I was getting great grades. I had good friends. These guys, we were singing together already.
Yeah.
Um, but it's not how it felt to me.
Right. I really appreciate Rod walking back to those moments with me. Through his eyes, what I needed was there, but undetectable. He shared a compelling example to suggest perhaps I would have opened up to teachers that were kind as he was, had I known their histories. Yet, it takes a lot of courage for a Black student to articulate their racial anxiety to a non-Black person, especially if that person hasn't opened that door. And I certainly didn't have the courage to knock back then. That disconnection highlights why it was so important for my wife and I to seek out the cultural resources our sons would need and to keep up with their own feelings of belonging. Despite any school's best intentions, there's no guarantee that they will take the initiative to reach out to your child and provide them with the support that they may be too reluctant or simply unable to admit they need. But by connecting with our sons' friends, their friends' parents, teachers, coaches, and administrators, we believe we had a good sense of the context in which they were learning. As far as I can tell, those tactics helped, and I have my experiences at Providence Country Day to thank for my part of our collective insight. Thank you for joining us.